if you see it closely, then जो उनके ancestors की कहानी, उनके पीछे उनके पूर्वजों की कहानी, मतलब राम के पूर्वजों की कहानी, कृष्ण के पूर्वजों की कहानी, तो मुझे नहीं लगता कि इतना सब कुछ जो है, इतनी सब कुछ डिटेल्ड जो उनकी डिस्क्रिप्शन है, उनके बारे में जो लिखा गया है, वो हवा में से ही ऐसे पैदा हो गया है। वो कहीं ना कहीं किसी ना किसी फॉर्म में हमेशा होगा, तभी किसी ना किसी ने उसको लिखा है। मुझे नहीं लगता ये हवा में से ऐसे पैदा हो गया। So yeah.
So Chaitanya, I think I want to put that out to the group. I mean, that's it's a very interesting point that we've brought about. The historicity of these myths. But I want to bring the question a little back, and I think I want to open it again to the group. How important is the historicity of the stories themselves? Okay, and the reason I'm asking is that as soon as you bring historicity, the conversation shifts to what was real, what wasn't real, and I think the meaning of the story. Like, think about the films we watch and all, right? Many times the films we watch, they're based on real life, they're documentaries, but they're also films that are very fantastical and all, right? So I want to ask this to the group, and I want to understand that, do myths have to be real, or do they have to have a historical trace to have the same impact that they have in our society? Does the meaning begin to diminish if they weren't tethered to some sort of a historical foundation? I would want someone else also to chime in. Maybe Tamsha, you can talk about this. Tamsha, you have a perspective on this? Okay, I think
I can go. I can maybe.
Yeah.
I do agree with you. I think what was coming up in the previous discussion about what is real, what is not real. I guess it is important in some ways to think about those things, but I do think that like the stories themselves, like they are human stories, and yes, as I think Anurag was saying, that sometimes they can be problematic because today's age is a little different. We have different ideas of things, but still those stories do manifest and persist, in our movies, in our TV shows, in what we read and what we see. And so that's, I think if you look at it from that sense, it's very potent, it's very strong and active, right? So, and that's, I think that is what we should maybe look at, and maybe some kind of patterns emerge into like how humans think, and things like betrayal, like how you bring up these themes that come up across myths, right? Those are very, I mean, that's as contemporary as possible, right? I mean, there is, in families there is drama, tension, betrayal. So that I think that is what is, I think, relevant to understand. Also, I do think, like, again, like what is real, what is not, that also I don't know, and maybe somebody else can elaborate on it, but there is a certain Western aspect of thinking in that way, of looking for proof, looking for like strong evidence, evidence based thing. Yes. So yeah. And I don't know if that is and again, like, this is controversial again, but is that a Western way of looking at things? Is that a Western approach to something like as simple as a story about of a human being? So and open to discussion. If anybody has interesting points to add, please do.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in here. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Anaga. Yeah, go ahead, Anaga. Yeah.
So the question of whether or not it's important, whether a myth did happen at all, I think can be looked at in two ways. I feel like it depends on the purpose of you studying or hearing or sort of giving a discourse on a myth. Maybe when you look at it from a religious angle, because a lot of myths have, apart from the MCU that you mentioned, a lot of myths do have a sort of religious aspect to it. So when it is being studied, spoken of in the context of people's religious beliefs, then obviously it comes from a place, like Chaitanya mentioned, it comes from a place of wanting to believe that it did happen. Whether or not it happened can be discussed for years on end, but then that is sort of what people want to walk away knowing from a story. They want to know that they can tie all the places to a physical part of the country or the world, so that it gives them, it allows them to continue believing in the stories and the values that those stories hold. So it's not just about the characters or the events, it's also about the values and the beliefs that that story then propagates. There, I think historicity is important, but I think for the likes of us who don't study it from a religious point of view alone, and we simply want to study the stories to understand the complexity that goes into it, because no myth is very simple. It's not just about what is happening. It's about a lot of, backstory to the characters, or different value systems that come into play. Even something very nuanced. I'm really sorry about the
No, it's okay.
system.
It's okay. No worries.
Yeah. It's also about, the kind of economic or socio-economic status of the society during that time. All these nuances sort of come in, and when we look at it with blinders on, only about whether or not it happened, we might actually miss out on some more important details. So I think it is important for there to be some historicity to myths if you are studying it in a way of wanting to believe that it happened, but it might not be as essential if you simply want to look at it as a story or draw comparisons and just like understand more about the complexities of it.
That's a very interesting thing. I think the place of historicity is within the domain of the thing, but it doesn't have to engulf the entire thing. That's an interesting point. Matangi, I think you wanted to say something, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to club in what both of them said. It kind of both had points of view that I agree with. So the thing is, like when we talk about a myth or a story or folklore or something, there are 2-3 aspects of it that kind of come in together. One is like, the cultural part that happened at that time. One is the actual history, and one is the story, and one is like, so all these things come together, forming that story or forming that belief or whatever it is. So when you look at authenticity or historicity per se, compared to maybe other Western countries, I don't think we have so much documented information in terms of these stories and beliefs or the actual happenings of something that happened, but lots have gone word of mouth. So I think that the way that comparison again is kind of a problem, because with a Western perspective saying, okay, these are authorized to be authentic, they have certain steps saying, okay, this has to be documented, you have to find something like this. But we do not fall under that category because that was not the norm with us. We have some things that have been documented, but most have been word of mouth, through songs, through folk tales, through proverbs and stuff like that. And it's just there. I mean, whether someone else has to come there and verify it, and like my point is, why do we have to give someone else that entire authority? And I think, like, if from an Indian perspective, if this is part of Indian culture, then I think, like, a lot of people should know about it. It's just part of knowing something that existed in your country. So I don't see why someone else has to come in and say, authenticate the historicity of it, because you are not part of my country. And if in my country, many people, it has gone through generations together like that, or there have been, maybe a temple or a university or the Sanchi Stupa or anything, or, it something was there. So around that only this entire story has been built up. So I just think we have to be informed. It's not about studying it as a subject, but I feel the next generation should know.
That's interesting. And I think
Can I add something?
yeah, sure.
Yeah, so just to address the larger theme of myths problematic and with respect to historicity, I think that when you actually attach historicity to myths, that's when it becomes problematic, because that gets an element of people's faith, people's beliefs, people's feelings involved, which can create unrest unless historicity in a myth reveals some progressive revelation. But most of the instances of historicity to myths have created unrest of some sort, according to my beliefs. So I think attaching historicity to myths does make the myths problematic in terms of how it affects present real life situations of people's emotions and people's feelings and beliefs and faiths.
I think that's a very fascinating point, because talking about the question of historicity itself, making it problematic or making it controversial, could be true. I think even the fact that many of us find the myth as a derogatory term, question the comes is that, do we find it only derogatory when they're talking about our myths, or do we find it offensive when they're talking about any myths? Like, would you get as offended if Greeks' stories, the story of Zeus and all, is called myth, or is it only offensive when we are talking about the Sanatan Dharma or the Indian story? So is it geographically limited that anything that happens beyond this border happened truthfully, or is it thing? And I think that itself is it's a question that I think we all need to grapple with. I definitely want to just narrow in on a more specific thing, just as a next thing. In the theme of what is our myths problematic, I think we're looking at the word myth. Is myth itself problematic? And I think you all had a very fascinating point of view, and the fact that we had such a diverse opinion itself tells us how relevant this problem is.